All right, this is part two of creating your podcast. So here I have my Feniger podcast saved on my desktop. So all I have to do to open it is double click it. We'll launch GarageBand automatically. And there it is. Hi, this is my podcast. And if we want to get rid of the EQ window, we can simply click up here on the smart controls, get rid of it. I'm going to rewind it back. Now what I want to do with this is I want to add some intro and outro music to this, loops, and we're going to use loops. So we're going to go up to the loop menu here, and I'm going to click on it, and it will show your Apple loops. Now, if you're not seeing all these loops, as I mentioned before, go to the loops, go to re-index all loops. Obviously, whatever computer you're on, you're not going to have as many loops as I do because I've purchased a lot of loops over the years for Logic. So we're going to look at this. You can either look at this for instruments or and you can also genre, mood, etc. But I'm going to switch over here, and this will show you all favorites, and I'll talk about how to add these to favorites later, and then genres, instruments, and moods. I'm going to go to genres, and in this case I'm going to select hip hop. So now it's going to show all the hip hop loops. And notice that these ones are grayed out. This basically means I have not uploaded them yet. Apple gives you a certain amount of loops with GarageBand, and you can download more. It takes time. So that's, if you're seeing this, it just means you have to download them. I'll show you how to do that later. So let's listen to the first one. So all you have to do is listen to it, is to click on it, and you'll hear it. So perfect. I like this. It's going to be great for my lovely podcast. I'm dragging it over to my podcast. Now, I'm going to close out the loop menu. I don't want this loop playing under my voice because it'll be distracting, but I want it to be an intro and an outro. So right now the loop is 16 seconds long. Don't want it that long. I want it maybe 5. So all I have to do is go down to the lower right-hand side. You'll see a left arrow, right arrow, and you'll just take it to 5 seconds. And then I'm just going to select my narration vocal, click and drag it, and I'm going to move it over right about 4 seconds, because then I want my loop. Well, actually, so if you notice, I have a little bit of dead space in here. We talk about editing audio. This is the simplest edit you can do. I'm going to take this and drag it to the left a little bit, or to the right, lower right hand side, and I'm going to go lower left hand or right hand side. I'll learn my left from my right, and I'm going to click and drag it. So now this is starting. Notice that this is where my voice actually kicks in, so I'll try to get as close to this as possible. And I'll talk about more editing later. Right now we're just doing simple stuff. So I want this to sort of fade into my audio. So how do you do that? So right now I have my starting. Hi, this is my podcast. And then my music sort of stops, but I want it to fade in to my or fade out into my voice. So how do I do that? Actually, I'm going to move this over a little bit more. So what you want to do is you want to hit the A key on your keyboard. This will give you automation. And here's your volume. Make sure this is selected volume. I'm going to talk about all these later. And I'm going to click on the volume node, and I'm going to create a node right here. A node is a dot. You see how I've created a dot or a node. And I'm going to make this fade out right about here. So I'm actually going to create 2 dots. And I'm going to make this fade down by clicking and dragging it down. And notice this. So now the volume will remain steady, and then it will fade down right into my voice. And you can try this by just hitting play. Hi, this is my podcast. Perfect. My voice faded out, so you can mess around with that. Now to get rid of this, obviously go A, and now you won't see it, but it's there. It'll work every time. Now I want to create outro music for this. This is a really truncated version of a podcast, but you'll get the idea by doing this. You're going to create a podcast for this course. So I'm going to highlight my audio, my loop beat, because I want to use this again. And I'm going to hold down the Option key, and I'm going to click and drag it. And this will make a duplicate of my Afrobeat. So now I have my outro beat. Now, this is where it's going to get a little fun. So I'm going to go A to show my volume. So I want this to fade back up as my voice ends. So in this case, I've created another node by clicking on it, another node, and I'm going to make this fade back up. And notice that it's showing your volume, 6.1 dB, and we talked about that earlier. And I'm going to make this right about 0 dB or close to 0 dB. Sometimes it's hard. There it goes, right to 0 dB. So I might want to move this up to 0 dB too. Totally up to you. This is just getting a little bit louder. You can mess with this, and you're going to have to use both of these. You can experiment with this. All right. So now what I should have when I play this. Hi, this is my podcast. I'm going to talk about absolutely nothing in this podcast, and so forth and so on. And my music goes out. Boom. There's my podcast. It's lovely. Okay. So we have the entire podcast. It's a lovely 16 seconds worth with intro, outro music. You've created this podcast. Let's export this podcast for future use. So we're going to go up to share. In this case, we're going to go export song to disk. All right. And I'm going to, again, make sure it's selected the desktop. And I'm going to make sure that it's an MP3 file. And it's a podcast, so you want to go with medium quality. Now, why do you have this pull-down menu? Because as you learned from your first lesson in this course, that depending on your sample rate, it's going to take up a lot more. The file's going to be larger or smaller depending on your sample rate. So in this case, it's a podcast. We're okay with medium quality, so the file will be smaller. It'll be easier to export, etc., etc. And this actually gives you the time, 6:19:17, 5:56 a.m. You can call this whatever you want. Relabel it just by going Fenninger early podcast. Since I guess it's early in the morning, not for me, but maybe for everybody else. And I'm saving to the desktop. I'm saving it medium quality, and I'm exporting it. And now I can collapse my window down just to make sure that it actually happened. There it is. It's showing up as an MP3 file. And if I click on it, hit the space bar, I can hear my podcast. Hi, this is my podcast. I'm going to talk. So there it is. Save it, because you're going to use this. We're actually going to create a podcast and upload it onto a web page in the future. So that's how you create a podcast. Very, very simple and intuitive.